Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Oh, boy, do I have the corona. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have the coronavirus.
I thought I gave you some more honey and cinnamon there.
I tell you what, somebody in Tampa Bay does, though, and we're going to talk about that today. We've got a lot of things to talk about. So many things today, Pat George. I was glad to hear you ahead of the show. Go ahead and pre-warn folks that there's absolutely no way we're going to get to it all.
Coming fast and furious.
Are coming fast and furious. I mean, look at the stack of stories I've got just on coronavirus. I mean, there's probably 30 of them. And, of course, they're all old news now because, every day, things change, and they change so fast that it's hard to keep up with. And we want to cover some other stuff because I'll tell you what, if you've been listening to the Morgan Streetman show, we were way out in front of the coronavirus story. In fact, we were
As always.
Well, we try to be, Pat George. We try our best. We were so far out ahead that originally people were accusing us of being conspiracy theorists or something like that. You're out to lunch, Street. We're talking about this coronavirus. It's not going to be anything. You don't know what you're talking about. And look, you're talking about that Wuhan Institute of Virology, and this clearly came out of the wet market where they serve recently cut up snakes and frogs and bat soup. That's where it came from, see? Because that's what the media is telling us. And, of course, a lot of that has proved what we said originally, just using our common sense, analyzing this stuff. A lot of what we said originally has been confirmed. And now, of course, some of the same people who were saying, oh, that coronavirus, you're just making all that stuff up. These are some of the same people that are hitting me now with text messages saying, oh, my God, it's the end of the world, and President Trump's the one who caused it. So we're going to tell you all about that today. Well, as much as we can in our little 42 minutes of time today, we're going to tell you about it. But before we jumped into that, wanted to just take a quick look back at a couple stories because you don't want to lose some of these other stories as things develop in national and international news. And, this coronavirus is kind of dominating everybody's thoughts right now. So we wanted to just cover a few stories that I think are pretty interesting. And one of them is that President Trump has nominated John Ratcliffe for the permanent director of national intelligence.
Now, this is our quick look back story, and it was news to me because I was absent when you did this story, so bring us up to speed.
Well, okay, so last week when we were talking about it, he nominated a, temporary kind of non-permanent person, Rick Grinnell, and now he's nominated, although obviously he's going to have to go through the Senate confirmation process, he's nominated John Ratcliffe. But interestingly, some of you may remember, what's old is new again, because he actually had nominated John Ratcliffe in late July of last year. I don't know if you remember that. And there was a big outcry, and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence basically indicated, that's Mark Warner and Richard Burr, they indicated they weren't going to support John Ratcliffe's nomination, that he wasn't qualified for the position. And, what ended up happening is the president ended up fairly quickly, within about a week or two, pulling his nomination. And I felt kind of bad for John Ratcliffe. He's a very honorable, congressman, and he served very honorably. And I think he's certainly as qualified as anyone else to lead that particular agency, as director of national intelligence. But now he's been renominated, and President Trump says that, basically they were waiting for the IG report to come out, which came out at the end of the year last year and found all kinds of problems with the way the intelligence community has handled things, particularly the FISA process. So now that that's come out, he says he's renominating him. So I'm sure we're up for a confirmation battle on that one, but it'll be interesting to see. I would assume that this time they are committed to the battle, and we're not going to see them pull that nomination again. And, of course, in the meantime, by making the nomination for the permanent position, President Trump imbues Ambassador Rick Grinnell with full power to operate in that position as a temporary appointment at the time. So we've already talked to you about how some of that has benefited the president, considering their allegations, the intelligence community's allegations about Russian interference. And then Ambassador Grinnell said, well, bring me the proof. And then they said, there's no proof of that. And she overstated things, of course. So, but if you don't hold them to account, you see what they'll try to get away with if you don't hold them to account. So I'm glad that there are some people who support the president now getting involved in the leadership of our intelligence community and holding them to account. Another story that I think is worth noting that came out just at the end of the week, and that is the White House won its appeal to the D.C. Court of Appeals that they would not have to produce former White House counsel Don McGahn for testimony, for deposition. Now, these were lawsuits brought by the House Judiciary Committee, led by Chairman Jerry Nadler. And remember, this is part of the reason they strung out taking those articles of impeachment over to the Senate, because they were trying to use those as a basis to give themselves standing in the D.C. Circuit Court to try and get these depositions, to try and get the Mueller grand jury material, and to try and get Trump's financial and tax records. Well, as these are being decided by the appeals court, these various issues, like Trump's tax records and now Don McGahn's testimony and the assertion of executive privilege, which we on this show told you plainly applies to the discussions that Don McGahn had with President Trump. He was the president's lawyer, and plainly, those discussions are privileged, both as attorney-client, but also as executive privilege. He was White House counsel. And so that never should have been inquired into. Nobody has the right to know what the president's thoughts are on different issues, and that's exactly what the House Judiciary Committee and the House as a whole was trying to get to bolster their impeachment case, which obviously was not really a case. The other thing this does is it tells you, they brought charges against President Trump for obstruction of Congress, for refusing to produce these people. Well, now that the courts have decided in his favor, doesn't that pretty well tell you whether or not he was actually obstructing Congress? No, he was just standing up for his rights and his powers and the protection of the office of the president. So everything that President Trump did in those cases is being found to be proper by the appeals courts, the courts of last resort, where these cases are being taken, and President Trump is being vindicated, and Congress and Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler are being shown to be, the partisans that they were. This was strictly a partisan effort.
That's all over CNN and the rest of the news networks. They're all talking about it.
Oh, I'm sure. They'll never speak of this. They'll never mention this to you because they never come back and tell you, when they have not told you accurately before. And of course,
that would take up the entire newscast.
You're exactly right, Roxanne. They would never be
checklisting everything.
There would be no end to it. They're like, okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just blanket tell you everything we told you last hour was a complete lie, right? And that's what they seem to be doing, and they manipulate people. And, I wanted to, speaking of circling back on something, we talked a little bit about the census last week. And, I looked into it a little bit. And as we said, you are required to answer the census itself by federal law. Now, that American Communities survey that they want to send you with the census that has like 50 questions on it, well, that's a different story. You are not under the same compulsion of federal law to answer that as you are to answer the census. So the census will ask you, 5 or 6 fairly straightforward questions, how many people are in your household and things like that. And that's, how we decide how many representatives to allocate to the different states and different areas. So, you have to answer the census by federal law. And there's the possibility of fining you, although I understand it's extremely rare. But the census itself shouldn't be offensive to answer. There's really nothing too invasive in the census. That American Community Survey that gets into a lot of personal details, that's a little bit of a different story, and I could certainly understand why folks don't necessarily feel comfortable.
That was like the ballots we had. Vote for this and you get this, so that you fill out the census and you have to do this too.
That's right.
It's kind of the same thing. They bundle them together.
Yep.
That's right. Try to get it 2 for 1 out of that. Well, all right. Now let's switch to some local interest stories, and this will get lost in the shuffle for sure because we got a big local interest story, which I'm sure you're all aware of already this morning. But before we get to that, we'll just mention to you, did you know there was a class action lawsuit brought against the Lightning for improperly texting fans? Apparently, and I'm not a huge Lightning person. I mean, I like the Lightning plenty well, but I don't go to all the games and stuff like that, so I don't know about all their promotions. But apparently they had a promotion, what they call a Bolts Text to Win promotion. And if you texted this number, 61873, they would start sending you back text messages. You were texting to try to join a contest, and they used it as an entree to start texting you regularly. And a Tampa man brought a lawsuit on this.
Now, this Tampa man who brought the lawsuit, undoubtedly he is a Lightning fan. Otherwise, why would he have been part of that
Right.
Go Bold sort of contest that they were doing?
Right.
So I wonder if he felt conflicted. You know what? They're not supposed to be doing this from a legal standpoint, so I like the team, but I'm still going to go for that money.
I like the team, but I like the money better. Well, the Lightning quickly settled the lawsuit, and this lawsuit was brought under the Federal Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which is really getting very common as a way to bring lawsuits in this country for people calling you by telephone or texting you when you haven't given them permission or when you've revoked that permission. And the Lightning's paying $2.3 million to settle this. So if you're somebody who's dealt with this particular promotion and you've sent the text and you've gotten texts back, you may be entitled to $45 from the Lightning for it. And the deadline to apply is June 8th, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. Round two. Round two.
I didn't know if that was a lunch bell.
Now that's a prize fight bell.
Let's go.
Don't fight. Just eat. Eat and be merry.
Let's get it on.
But wash your hands before you eat.
That's right. You better wash your hands, and you may want to get a face mask. Well, the CDC says don't get a face mask. Don't get a face mask. But now, you know what? I mean, you go to sleep, you wake up, the news has changed. Everywhere you look, the coronaviruses have doubled. The number of cases have doubled. The number of deaths have doubled. And here we are in the state of Florida, and you had to wonder, when are we going to get our first case? I mean, an international tourist destination like the state of Florida with Walt Disney World, with our beautiful beaches. I mean, people are coming and going all the time, right? Coming and going here, there, and yonder. And surely in Florida, we've got to have a case. Well, now we got a couple cases in the state of Florida.
Nearby.
I don't know if they've been – I know as of late last night, like 11:30, the story came out and said Florida had its first two cases, one here in Hillsborough County and one down in Manatee County, which, of course, is just south of us here in Hillsborough. Those are the two cases, and they said they weren't yet completely confirmed. Now, I don't know if they have actually confirmed them this morning. I know that's what the news is saying, is that they're confirmed. But, of course, we know the governor is showing up here in Hillsborough County sometime this morning for a press conference, and he's already declared a state of emergency in the state of Florida.
Now, the two cases that we're talking about, and to answer part of what you said, Morgan, the reason they're not confirmed, they use the test kits here, which are available in Jacksonville, Miami, and Tampa, but then they go and confirm it with the CDC.
I see.
We'll have that, and that takes 3 to 5 or 5 or so days, whereas that other test that's done right here only takes 24 to 48 hours to get those results. So those two cases that we're referring to, one is in Manatee County. We don't know much about that except for the person who has it doesn't quite know where they got it because they didn't travel to any of these places. And the person in Hillsborough who has it did indeed travel to Italy.
Yes, right. The person got it from Italy. Boy, it seems to be all over Italy. And, the Pope has been canceling appearances and has been photographed, blowing his nose and sneezing and other such things. And, I mean, there's some speculation out there, does the Pope have it over there in Italy? Because it's just running rampant, apparently, in Italy. There are 50,000 plus people under quarantine in Italy. And, when I wrote it down as of last night, I had reports of there being 800 cases in Italy. Well, now there's 1,700 reported cases. So you go to sleep, you wake up the next morning, and it's doubled. And they've got 34 plus dead in Italy. So, when you run those numbers, it's a pretty significant percentage. I mean, in that, we're looking at basically the 1% to 2% range is what we're dealing with in terms of deaths, which that actually would kind of match up with the numbers that we had coming out of China. But that's going to be worldwide a significant number of people. And it seems like it's going to be impossible to avoid this coronavirus the way that it's spreading. I mean, I don't know if you saw the reports out of Washington, but there have been a couple of folks in Washington State who have already died from the coronavirus. There was one as of Saturday early afternoon when the president had a press conference on the matter. And now, as of today, it's been reported there are 2 deaths, and there probably, I'm guessing, there are more than 2 deaths even, because there has apparently been a study up there that's shown that the coronavirus has been spreading in Washington State for 6 weeks now, and there are probably 1,500 plus people who are infected with it.
What is this deal with the flu? The flu goes away when the winter's over, so you think the corona will do this?
Well, I don't know, Pat George. I mean, we talked about that, and why is there a flu season and then there's an off season for the flu, and it has to do with people's immune systems.
Right. Two factors. The reason we have the off season for the flu is because Our immune systems are stronger in warmer weather, number one. And number two, in cooler, colder weather, you're going to be packed in tighter places with people and more likely to spread germs. That's not something that, it's weird because, of course, we get the flu down here, but we're not as packed in as you might be up north.
Right,
dealing with those winters.
Well, and breathing all that recirculated air. Oh, well, I tell you, FDA Director Scott Gottlieb says, and you've got to wonder when these folks are government officials and they're coming out and saying things like this, you've got to wonder what information do they have that we don't have. But FDA Director Scott Gottlieb says there are probably the low thousands of cases in the U.S. And so we know if it's been spreading in the community, undetected, unknown in Washington State, and there are probably 1,500 plus cases, where have those people traveled to all around the country? You know, there's reports of cases in Illinois, Rhode Island. There's reports of cases essentially popping up all over this country, and I think we'll continue to see that. So coronavirus is here to stay. What are you going to say?
DeSantis is at the health department, Hillsborough County Health Department, getting ready to speak now.
Okay, well, we're not going to cut away to that, but that is something you may want to watch yourself. Although I have to tell you, these press conferences are exceptionally boring. So if you're making your listening decision, I recommend that you stay here with the Morgan Streetman Show because we'll try to keep it interesting for you and somewhat sensational. And speaking of sensational, if you look, there's pictures and video from all around the country of people just absolutely raiding the Sam's Clubs and the Costco's, buying up all the face masks, buying up all the bottled water, all the prepared foods that, you know, they can store away. It's all of a sudden everybody's become a prepper. I also understand toilet paper is selling out.
I can't figure that one out.
Well, I guess they're just worried. I mean,
you use that though? Do you wipe your nose?
I just think, you know, if things are going to start selling out, I mean, what do you absolutely want to have? What's the one luxury that you really want to have? I mean, you might not have running water, but at least if you have toilet paper, you can keep your hands clean, right? Oh. Boy.
But I think there's a component there where we should not panic because panicking isn't going to do anybody any good, especially a collective panic is not going to do us good.
I say we all run for the doors right now. Let's have a stampede. Well, you know, the good news is we are in, you know, one of the most advanced countries with the best health system. I mean, imagine if you were in, like we said, sub-Saharan Africa, where, by the way, the first cases are being reported in sub-Saharan Africa. And you know there's got to be more than they're reporting there, but they have nothing even close to our health system to deal with it. But, you know, even when you think about this country and you think about some of the homeless encampments that we've got in our big cities now, like out in Los Angeles and San Francisco, you know, these homeless communities that have formed, what's going to happen when the virus, and it may already be in those communities, what's going to happen, though, when the virus gets into those communities, you know, where you've got a high degree of substance abuse and addiction issues, which, you know, how long is somebody who's addicted to methamphetamine or crack cocaine going to self-quarantine, do you think? Probably not very long because they're going to need a fix. And so, you know, how fast is it going to spread through some of those communities where drug addiction is absolutely rampant? And then what happens? Are we going to take all of those homeless people and put them into the ICU? I mean, do we really have the facilities for that? Do we have the money for that? It's going to be interesting here to see what happens. And, of course, this is spreading now worldwide. I mean, absolutely worldwide. In France, overnight, the number of deaths has doubled to 4 from 2. And in France, they've even shut down the Louvre, that famous museum in Paris, the Louvre, where many famous works of art are, including the Mona Lisa. They've closed that. They've got breakouts of the virus apparently at French military bases involving some of the folks that they used to bring back some of the French nationals who had gotten coronavirus, both from China and from this Diamond Princess cruise, where, you know, it seems to be so many people caught it and then were taken back to their home countries. So now they've got breakouts at some of their military bases. And they've even in France, they've banned gatherings larger than 5,000 people. I mean, can you believe that? So they're really taking some pretty serious steps.
Nothing in Russia, huh?
To try to, well, that's right. Nothing coming out of Russia. Isn't that interesting?
A lot of stuff comes out of Russia, and they meddle in everything, but no, they don't get the COVID-19.
Well, they get accused of meddling in everything, don't they?
So you've heard that, as we mentioned a moment ago, they're doing testing now in Tampa, Miami, and Jacksonville. So you may be saying to yourself, I thought, well, how do you know to go get tested? What's the tipping point? So here's what it is. They're going to test you if you have these symptoms, which are cough, respiratory issues, breathing trouble, fever, and then you've already been tested for the flu and you don't have the flu. So if you have those symptoms and you're negative on the flu, they're probably going to send you to get it tested. Now, on the other hand, if you have those symptoms and you've traveled to any of those places that we know of, South Korea, Italy, Iran, China, then they're also going to test you or have been in contact with someone who has.
Well, and a spot of good news, apparently there are over or at least 20 coronavirus vaccines currently in development worldwide. Now, it'll probably be quite a while in coming because once they develop the vaccine, they've got to test it, and it's got to go through a certain process to make sure that it's safe or relatively safe. And so, probably looking at a year, maybe as much as a year and a half until we start having widespread availability on the coronavirus vaccine. But that day is at least coming, and they'll be putting all their efforts into it. Like Senator Tom Cotton said a few weeks ago, we need a Manhattan Project level of investment to develop a coronavirus vaccine. One other interesting aspect of the coronavirus that hasn't been widely reported on yet, but it seems to be that you can catch it more than once, which makes it different from a lot of viruses, because typically when you catch a virus, your body develops antibodies to it, and you can't catch the same virus twice. Now, we don't know if these people are catching slight mutations of the coronavirus, if it's mutating that fast and they're recatching it, or if you're just able, because of some aspect of this virus, to catch it more than once. But that's a whole other aspect of the virus that's yet to be discovered and explored. We'll jump into a few other stories when we come back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Well, if you are invested in the stock market or you care about the economy and you're keeping an eye on things last week, it was not pretty.
Oh, boy.
Not pretty at all.
I'll tell you, it was a tough week. I mean, it was every day the Dow was down 1,000+ points. I mean, it was just it was a bloodbath. And, globally, worldwide, stocks around the world have crashed significantly, and everyone's pointing back to this coronavirus story as really being the cause of it. And we told you about some of the economic effects that it would have on China, but we're looking at $5 trillion worth of wealth wiped out from world stocks. And this is the fastest collapse in history. Now, just to give you an idea of, $5 trillion, it's really hard to conceive of numbers this big. It's about a quarter of the U.S. economy, or equivalent to basically the entirety of the GDP, gross domestic product, of the country of Japan each year. So that's a lot of money. Now, of course, you only lose when you sell, right? I mean, until it's all kind of paper gains anyway.
Yeah, best thing not even to look at it.
And it was
great advice. The best advice so far, yes.
Don't even look at it. Just put your head in the
sand.
sand, folks. This is financial advice from the pros right here. Bury your head deeply in the sand right now.
You'll feel better.
Well, the Dow Jones was at an all-time high, and it actually saw its fastest collapse since what year? 1928. And what was that? The beginning, essentially, of the Great Depression. So back in and if you look at the charts, it's almost an exact match, both for the peak and the fall, to what happened right before the Great Depression. Now, there was a slight rebound for basically a couple of years in the Dow back in the late 20s, and then it began a long, slow slide over several more years, and it continued to go way, way down. Now, hopefully that's not what we see in this country, because many of us were enjoying our paper gains, at least, thinking, wow, we got it made now. I'm a rich man and woman. Well, I'm just a man, but in any event, those of us out there in the audience were thinking these types of thoughts. And in fact, I've talked to a couple of friends of mine, and they've said, oh, boy, my 401k last week, it just took a hit, So hopefully there'll be a rebound. I don't know that stocks are cheap per se. We'll have to wait and see what happens, though, because they were pretty overbought at that point at the peak. And this is what tends to happen when everybody goes all in and buys. And then when they turn around and try to sell, there are no more buyers left because everybody's already bought into the market hysteria. So what happens?
We're up a little bit today. Just keeping an eye on it.
It's bounced a little bit today. And that's what you'd expect to see. I mean, it doesn't typically go all the way down all at once.
By the way, just an update on the governor speaking. All of 30 seconds, he turned it over to the doctor saying nothing new, and they're going to take questions.
Well, they're not going to be sensationalistic or controversial. So, he's just showing that he's out there working hard for us.
Exactly.
And he's focusing on this. So, and that's what we want, obviously. We want them to take as much action as they can.
And this is another reminder of what do you want your government to do? Protect you from things like this.
Yeah, and, of course, some of us would argue the government doesn't do such a great job of that, but I guess since we've already got it and they're already in place, hopefully they'll at least do a good job at this point with what they've got. And speaking of governments, I mean, and look what happens with these economic crashes. And Roxanne, like I was talking to you about before the show, whenever you have a worldwide economic downturn, a lot of times you've got a follow-on effect after that cause, and the follow-on effect many times is a war of some sort. And a lot of times in history, politicians have viewed war as an antidote to an economic collapse. Now, last week we had the news that one war was ending, right? The U.S. has signed a peace treaty now with the Taliban, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, which is what the Taliban is known as. And we've now signed a peace treaty with them, ending the 18-year war in Afghanistan, which I think is certainly a good thing. I mean, frankly, it wasn't getting any better and hasn't been getting any better for many, many years. We haven't been making much progress there. But as soon as one war ends, we have another war, looks like it's beginning, and that's a war between Turkey and Syria. And I don't know if you heard, and Pat George, you're shaking your head, but I don't know if you heard at the end of the week last week, the Syrians, and maybe even with some degree of Russian involvement, because we know the Russians are propping up the Syrian government both economically and militarily. But the Syrians bombed a bunch of Turkish soldiers, killing 33 Turkish soldiers in an airstrike in Idlib province. And, of course, this is the province that borders, it's a Syrian province that borders on Turkey, and Turkey has been very militarily active in that province. Now, Turkey responded by shooting down a couple of Syrian planes, some Su-24 aircraft. Of course, those are Russian-made aircraft that Turkey has now shot down. They also did some airstrikes, destroyed more than 100 tanks, and blew up a bunch of air defense systems in Syria. But things appear to be escalating there. Neither side is backing down. And Turkey's even gone so far, although not officially, but there have been some pretty high-level people in Turkey involved in President Erdogan's political party that have already requested that NATO become involved on behalf of its NATO ally, Turkey, in a war against Syria. Now, what could that result in? I mean, they've been trying to bring some kind of a war, and I say they. I mean, it appears as though the powers that be in the world have been trying to create some type of a war between NATO and Russia for quite some time now. I mean, many years, and we hear about all of the Russian threats. And, of course, Russia has done some pretty aggressive things like taking over a part of the Ukraine and other things. So maybe this is all deserved. I'm certainly not going to jump in and heavily defend Russia, but I would say that as a general concept, I think we need to try not to go to war with each other, and certainly not these big world wars. Anybody that looks at the history of the 20th century, the last century, can see that world wars result in almost unmeasurable human destruction and human suffering, and really are a very, very sad event.
Absolutely. So that's what you want to avoid at all costs. And I don't think we're headed. This is, not something that we're going to get pulled into in any sort of near future. This is just something that's bubbling on the horizon between these two countries.
Well, possibly. We'll have to see what happens. I think if it doesn't escalate, you're exactly right. Of course, there was a report that a U.S. carrier strike group, the USS Dwight Eisenhower strike group, has now entered the Mediterranean, ostensibly to participate in some European war games that are designed to, I think, address a potential Russian invasion of Europe. Of course, we've been playing these games since the Cold War, but it's been quite some time since we've played in these games, and now there is a U.S. carrier strike group. So keep your eye on the movements of the USS Dwight Eisenhower, and if that winds up somewhere right off the Syrian coast, that could be indicative that there's going to be an increased level of U.S. involvement in this situation, and possibly NATO as well. Meanwhile, and this one's kind of hard to figure out, Turkey is basically saying that it's going to release a bunch of migrants who've come through the Middle East into Europe. And, of course, Europe doesn't have the facilities at this time to deal with all of these migrants or invaders or whatever you want to call them, illegal immigrants that are coming into Europe from these various countries. And one just wonders, as you think about that, I mean, how many of those people are going to be infected with coronavirus as they make their way in? And are there going to be facilities to test all of these people? The answer is no. They don't even know what to do with these people. But it appears as though it's really an invasion of people from outside of Europe coming into Europe, and they're coming in because of the social welfare systems that's been set up in Europe and the benefits that are given that you don't get, and they don't get this in their countries of origin, in their home countries. They don't have access to this kind of, free health care, free education, free housing, all of these things that they get all throughout Europe. And, they're going to be bleeding Europe dry financially, and that's going to happen. Apparently, there are between 15 and 30,000 of them massing at the border between Turkey and Greece.
Now, with Brexit, does that mean that they're prevented from going into England?
Well, somewhat, yeah. I mean, they're going to have a harder time getting into England, not only just because it's an island, but now that it's sort of dissociated from the EU, at least beginning to dissociate from the EU. But they've talked about restricting that freedom of travel, although I don't know exactly what that's going to look like at the end of the day, how they're going to deal with that between the UK and the European Union, because I know that's one of the features that a lot of people, particularly in the UK, wanted to keep open, as the freedom to travel throughout Europe. So we'll have to see what that actually results in. But I think by virtue of the fact that it's an island, it is slightly harder to get to. The more natural areas that they're trying to get into are, Germany and really more of Central Europe, and that's where the populations in France, of course, seem to be taking up large residences and frankly, creating these enclaves. In other words, they're coming into the countries, and by and large, they are not adopting the culture and the mode of life of the country that they're coming into, but they're trying to reestablish the culture and mode of life of the country that they came from. And one wonders why you would do that to some degree. I mean, why, if you liked it so much, why go to a different country? So that it's going to be harder in a different country. And I think the answer is because of the free stuff. That's why they're doing it, because of the free stuff.
And I'm giving myself a little refresher course in geography and then reminding myself that, yes, Turkey is over here and United Kingdom is over here.
That's right.
This is me pulling up my map and taking a look at the distance there. Yes.
Well, and speaking of wars, we got to talk a little bit about the Democrat primary, because Joe Biden somehow pulled it off in South Carolina. I mean, he thought he was dead man walking, but no, he won the South Carolina primary with almost 50% of the vote. He got 48.45% of the vote. Coming in second was Bernie Sanders with just under 20% of the vote. Then you had third Tom Steyer with under 12%. Now, he's already dropped out of the race after spending $250 million, didn't win a single delegate. Fourth place, Pete Buttigieg. He's also dropped out of the race already, and they say, well, this will strengthen Biden, and maybe they're right about that. And then, of course, fifth place, Pocahontas didn't even crack 10%. She barely got 7% of the vote in South Carolina. And, of course, tomorrow's Super Tuesday. Coming up Super Tuesday, we'll see a lot of delegates be allocated on that day. And I wanted to, and goodness gracious, there comes the music. I mean, we just don't have enough time in the show, folks. We got more information
I just turn it off.
To share with you than time. But I had some things I wanted to share. I'm going to have to trim here. I'm really going to have to trim. I was going to go back and play some of the old Biden clips for you. Like, here's an oldie but a goodie.
Exponentially.
And just kind of get into some of Biden's hilarious gaffes, including another gaffe that he made over the weekend. And we can't miss sharing that one with you. And, of course, to share that one with you, we got to share the precursor, and that was President Trump at CPAC. So when we come back from the break, we'll share some President Trump at CPAC. We'll share Joe Biden on Fox News Sunday. And then we'll get into our Out There segment. Of course, we won't have enough time to do it justice yet again, but we got to follow on from our Out There segment last week we're excited to share with you. We'll be right back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
And we're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. We got to jump right into all this.
We got to get right into the clips.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean,
Let's
we
hear
got
some from Trump, too, because we haven't talked much about him this week.
That's right.
Today.
Well, he was at CPAC over the weekend, and on Saturday, it's a great little speech he gives. It was very similar to his rallies, but he had some stuff talking about old sleepy Joe Biden. And you got to hear some of this because it then triggered a response in Biden, which we'll get to. But listen to this.
How could you be easier to beat than Joe? The guy can't put two sentences together. It's insulting. How can you be easier? But, he is more down the middle. Everyone knows he's not a communist, right? And with Bernie, there's a real question about that. But he's definitely a radical left socialist Democrat. And people know that. With Joe, he's sort of down the middle, The difference is Joe's not going to be running the government. He's just going to be sitting in a home someplace. And people are going to be running it for him.
That's so true.
And they will be radical left socialists. So that's what you have to remember. There's no way he's going to be running the government.
When you listen to the cadence of his voice, it almost sounds like he is a skilled entertainer or comedian.
He
sounds
absolutely
like a
is. Absolutely. Well, and this is based on the stuff we didn't get to play for you ahead of time, which is some of the old clips of all of Joe Biden's gaffes. You remember LGBYN? And we played for you exponentially. And how about I'm going to eliminate the capital gains tax? I'm going to double the capital gains tax. Remember that one from the debate? The guy's just kind of all over the board. He doesn't know what he's saying. Well, this is brought up to him when he's on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, not Chuck Wallace, but Chris Wallace. And you got to hear some of the interaction. Because, first of all, Biden's pretty slow at this. I'm not going to say, but listen to what he had to say.
Oh, give me a break. God love him. I'm going to resist saying what I feel like saying. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to try to, assign names and insults to the stable genius. I can hardly wait to debate him on stage. I want people to see me standing next to him and him standing next to me. We'll see who's sleepy.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Thanks for your time. Please come back in less than 13 years, sir.
All right, Chuck. Thank you very much.
All right. It's Chris, but anyway.
Chris. I just did Chris. No, I just did Chuck. I tell you what, man, these are back-to-back. Anyway.
No, it's okay.
I don't know how you do it early in the morning, too.
I don't know how you do it early in the morning, man. I don't like to get up before about 10 a.m. I don't want to be president. I just want to sit in my home and watch the TV.
If you're forgetting people's names and you're afraid people are going to mistake that for you sounding elderly and not with it, then you quickly pepper in a man. Hey, man, because that makes you sound younger, you see?
That's right. That's right, man. Oh, boy. Poor Biden. He just can't win for losing. I'll tell you what. So, anyway, that we wanted to cover that. Now, we're going to have to jump into our Out There or we're going to run out of time. So, last week, we first started talking about Phil Haney. And then, lo and behold, Louis Gohmert on the floor of the U.S. Congress gives about a 45-minute speech on his friend Phil Haney. And I just want to play a little bit of it for you because I think it's worth listening to. So, listen to Louis Gohmert here on Philip Haney.
I've had a friend that I met here years ago named Philip Haney. Philip studied Arabic culture and language while he was working as a scientist in the Middle East before he became a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security in 2002. He won numerous awards and commendations from his superiors for meticulously compiling information and producing actionable reports that led to the identification of hundreds of terrorists. He specialized in Islamic theology and the strategy and tactics of the global Islamic movement. He wrote a book after he retired from government service, a takeoff on the Obama administration slogans, see something, say something. But as he experienced firsthand, he saw things that were a threat to this country. He said something, and he was severely punished for it because apparently the Obama administration had some radical Islamic ties that they did not want anybody, including Philip Haney, to expose. So he had a book he wrote, See Something, Say Nothing, and it documented the Obama administration's effort to obfuscate the role that radical Islam played in numerous Muslim terrorist attacks that took place in America from 2008 to 2016. He had been entering information on radical Islamic ties with people in the United States, attempting to come into the United States, with ties to people in the United States. He was documenting all those things. And we had a Secretary of Homeland Security who bragged about how Homeland Security could connect the dots. And then he was ordered to start removing these dots, so to speak. He was ordered to start deleting thousands of pages of data that he had carefully researched and identified that would help protect America. That was during the Obama administration. He was scared for his country that the Obama administration would make him delete. And there was an occasion when he was watching his computer and somebody started deleting hundreds of pages of documents as he watched. He became an official whistleblower. He became a whistleblower, filed his IG complaint about the Obama administration deleting so much data from its database to help identify terrorists. He had hoped to be coming back in the next few weeks to work for the federal government. And Friday, he was found in his car with a gunshot wound and a gun nearby. And we had a mutual pact. If it said either one of us end up having committed suicide, then the other is going to make sure that truth wins out.
Did you hear that? Wow.
That gives you goosebumps.
He had a pact with U.S. Congressman Louis Gohmert that if either one of them was ever found to have committed suicide, and of course that was the initial finding, he was found next to his car with a discharged firearm nearby. And this is in Amador County, California, which is right outside of San Francisco in the hills of the Sierra Nevadas. He was found shot basically on a deserted road. This guy was getting ready to come back to the U.S. government and come back to work with the U.S. government to fight radical Islamic terror. He was also getting ready to get married. He's going to be married early April. And he was a Christian. I don't know if I cut that part out of the clip. I can't remember. I had a longer clip. I had to cut it down to try to get it all in. But I wanted you to hear about that pact that if he or Louis Gohmert was ever found to have committed suicide, the other one is supposed to go out there and make sure that the truth is known that they didn't commit suicide. And I'm telling you, I've got people messaging me about this on Twitter and other places who are saying this guy did not kill himself. He absolutely did not kill himself. He had a lot to live for and a lot to look forward to. So apparently the Amador County Sheriff has retracted the suicide determination and is looking into this a little bit more, and we'll have to see what happens. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.